Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Milsurp World, the podcast all about military surplus. I'm your host, Aaron, and today I'm joined by Mike and Danny. Say hi, guys.
Hi.
Oh,
All right, today's topic, we're going to talk about military surplus ammunition. But first, I have a couple of corrections from the French rifle development episode. And we had some information come in from, I guess I would call a fan, that we needed to make some corrections. First thing, the butt plate for the Cuirassier rifle was not rubber. It was actually a two-piece leather butt plate. And then for the Berthier rifle for Indochina, it was not lengthened because they could not handle the recoil of the carbine rifles. It was lengthened because they could not handle the weight of the Lebel, and the Berthier long rifle was actually lighter. So that is why that rifle became into existence. I just wanted to get that out of the way right at the top. And actually, Mike is new to the podcast. So, Mike, why don't we do a little bit of an introduction where you talk about what started you into Milsurps, how long you've been collecting, and what kind of you go into?
Sure. Let's see. I guess I've been collecting for 10 years now. Started in '08. My first Milsurp rifle was a Mosin Nagant M44. Literally had nothing, I had no information about it at all. So I pretty much learned from there. Then my second one was a Mauser. Then it kind of went out from there.
was it a G98?
No, it was a K98K. It was a Micheal Mauser. I know, it's
Your
bad.
first Mauser was a Micheal's?
Yes.
Dun,
Yes,
dun,
it
dun.
was. But that was before I knew about Mausers. I did kind of think it was cool, but after I started learning more, I kind of hated it more, but it was a great shooter. I loved shooting it. I shot the crap out of it. After, I don't know, maybe after Mauser, number 20, I sold it and bought more Gewehr 98s.
How many
But
Gewehr
yeah.
98s do you have, Mike?
I have 20 right now. I think in overall total, I've had 25. And I pretty much blame it all on my dad
What'd he do?
because so what he did, okay, so my dad's a coin collector, and long story short, he told me about a date set. It's one of every single coin of production. So if you had 20 years, you would have 20 coins each year. And he kind of got me into the collect 1 year of every single year of production made for a Gewehr 98. So I started from there, and I think I have 8 more years to go, and I will be complete with that. Then I'll probably work on the variants, even though I'm working on the variants right now. But it's just hard finding them because of the 100th anniversary of the World War One, and they're just going up in price. And every time I buy one and I post it on our group, that people get pissed at me. But yeah. It's an interesting journey, especially when they're just so crazy because there's really weird little details that you kind of have to know to look for, or you just don't know because. If you buy a Gewehr 98, people are just like, okay, that's a Gewehr 98. But then when you kind of know, then you're like, okay, that stock is different. That has in it. Then
Whoa, it cut off there, but
just like the stocks are different from pre-World War One to World War One production. Even different wood they used. I kind of like Mausers from the 1890s. Those are probably my favorite next to a Gewehr 98. And I have a couple rare ones of those, which I kind of bought by accident. And then a nice guy named Lee kind of got me stuck on Spanish Mausers, as you call it, Aaron, the Spanish flu.
yeah.
But I collect other stuff, but mostly Mausers are my main thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so Danny wanted to discuss this topic today, which is military surplus ammunition, because we got a comment on one of the YouTube channel posts for a previous episode, and they wanted to see about military surplus ammunition. So, Danny, do you want to start us off?
So Milsurp Ammo is one of those really interesting topics because it's a really broad sort of area for collecting. There's various reasons, why people buy it, and some controversy, and, Milsurp Ammo that we'll get into. But, somebody commented on my YouTube channel. So it was a good idea, and I've been meaning to make this one. So I think this will be a good topic.
So let's move into the first question, I guess, which is why should you use military surplus ammunition? Why bother?
Yeah. So why use it? Well, I think the main reason why people use it is because, or at least maybe in the past, why people used it is because it's cheap. For a lot of ammos, it is still, the cheapest military surplus ammo, on the market. Like, to give an example, as far as like 8mm Mauser goes, surplus ammo is still probably going to be cheaper than commercial ammo. It's getting harder and harder to find, of course. I think it's mostly like the Turkish ammo that's available right now, but you can look up and find some Yugo or Romanian or whatever for like a fair price. And then the big one is the 8x56R, the M95. It's funny because that ammo on the commercial market is so expensive. Like, Nazi produced 8x56 is cheaper than the commercial ammo still, which is it's still like $1 a round. It's funny that even that is cheaper. So I think that's the main reason why people collect it. I mean, is that the reason why you guys?
We can't discount also the Soviet Union's massive stockpile of 7.62 by 39 and 7.62 by 54R.
Yeah, that's true. That really flooded the U.S. market for, decades. We've just been, flooded in that stuff. And I think the 54R is drying up. That's not anymore. But the by 39 though, that's still that stuff is everywhere, and it's still pretty dirt cheap.
Mike, do you use surplus ammunition in your rifles?
Yeah, sometimes. It kind of depends on what it is, really. I use a lot of Turkish 8mm Mauser, and I use Romanian 8mm Mauser. And I've used Greek 30-06 before, and that's some pretty wicked stuff. I think that's really about it.
Yeah,
I have some old surplus 45 as well, ACP, but I've never shot it because it's still in the cardboard case.
Yeah, that Romanian 8mm Mauser, like the older stuff, not that new Romanian crap that's on the market now, but they're like 70s or 60s production Romanian 8mm Mauser. That is really good ammo. I know it's steel cased, and a lot of people look down on it because it's steel cased. Really accurate, and it's reliable, and it's one of the only military surplus ammos that's recommended to run through the G43 and K43 rifles. That steel case isn't gonna rupture like a brass case would. And I saw a guy who he actually won a lot of shooting competitions G43 with Romanian 8mm Mauser, and I was talking to him about it, and he said, yeah, unfortunately it's dried up, so I won't be able to do this for too much longer. But I guess he bought a bunch back in the day, and he's running out. But that is good ammo.
Yeah. I really have only used, as far as surplus goes, 7.62 by 54R and actually 7.62 by 38R for the Nagant revolver. And the Nagant revolver ammunition, we talked about that in our previous episode. The Nagant revolver, it is what it is. It's not great to begin with as a round, so it's not like it's much better as a military surplus, but it was cheaper and easier to find. 7.62 by 54R is pretty standard. I don't know what the ones that I had, where they were from, but there's a bunch of variation with that from country to country, and we'll get into that. Actually, now that since we're talking about the Soviet stuff, Danny, why don't we talk about the next big thing, what is corrosive and what that means and what you should do.
Oh boy.
Now, we're not going to go into deep dive here, guys. We're not going to go off on a deep end and start railing on people that love Windex. But Danny, do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll jump into this. So this has kind of become a pet peeve of mine, sort of. It's being added to the list of my gun pet peeves. But corrosive ammo is a term given to, this is just a simplification, it's ammo where there is salt inside the propellant or inside the primer, and it kind of gets into the action that way. Like, if they don't know that it's salt, they just hear corrosive and they think like, oh, like this is going to kill my rifle, this is going to eat it up and everything. And I think it would be a better term, just call the ammo salty, instead of corrosive. It sounds a lot harsher than it actually is. To me, I have shot a ton of corrosive ammo. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's worth the worry that a lot of people put into it.
So to put the scientific side of it out there, it's the primers that are corrosive. They use either potassium chlorate or sodium tetrachlorate, which when burned decomposes into potassium chloride or sodium chloride, which is table salt, common table salt. So what happens is that residue, it stays in your barrel, it stays in your action or whatever, and that will eventually attract moisture. I have seen it in areas like where I live, where it is high humidity in my area. It's typical in the summer for it to be 80-90% humidity. I have seen it where I've shot my M9130 in the morning, and by the next morning, it's got startings of rust in the barrel. Now, I'm not talking like huge amounts. I'm talking like it definitely, you can see a different coloration at the muzzle and stuff like that. And it's not like it immediately is just gone, but it starts very quickly if it's in high humidity environments. Now, to be very clear about it, it's salt. It's literally sodium chloride, and you can wash it out with water. It dissolves in water.
That's true.
Yeah, you don't need any fancy, like, whatever. You don't need the big one, Windex with ammonia. Oh, it's going to, magically, fix it. Oh, which it does. Like, it's not that it doesn't.
It's not that it doesn't. It's because it's a liquid. You can use basically any non-corrosive cleaning liquid, water, soapy water, whatever. You can use your basic bore cleaners. That'll do that too. It's getting the salt out of the barrel is the thing.
Yeah. So really, liquid. It just takes liquid. You don't have to use anything fancy. You can use hot water. Now, for me, when I shoot corrosive ammo, I don't use anything. All I use is oil. Gun, like normal, and use a little bit more oil than I normally would, and that does it fine. I don't get any rust or corrosive problems from that, just with oil.
And most of your bore cleaners, the reason why they clean so well is begin with this stuff is because they're water-based.
Yeah, they're water-based solvents is what they are.
I normally just use like soapy water, like hot soapy water, or just oil. I don't even use Windex anymore.
Now, the benefit of using Windex, and I will give that crowd their benefit here because I'm sure I'll get a comment about it if I don't. Ammonia is in Windex, and that is why people want you to use Windex. Ammonia does nothing to salts. It may balance the pH level, but it's not going to make a difference here. The key thing that ammonia does is that it breaks up copper buildup. So that will actually break up copper buildup in your bore. That is something that's useful with ammonia, but that's typically also in most bore cleaners.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I know there's a lot of Windex fans, and every time online I see anyone talking about corrosive ammo, like I always see a lot of comments of people saying, use Windex with ammonia, and it's an okay bore cleaner on its own, but you still have to oil it afterwards. So you could just oil it, and when you wipe it with oil, that gets the salt off, and it adds oil to protect it. So
and the oil
prevents
from the ambient oxygen and hydrogen in the air from combining with the salt.
Yeah, and fancy terms,
we're getting super scientific here, but we have to because we're not dealing with some kind of magical situation here. It's literally you've put salt into metal. You need to remove it, and you just don't need anything special for it. Just get it out of there.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same as shooting black powder, to be honest, because there's sulfur in black powder.
Yes. Yeah, you need to clean that out. You can't just leave it in there.
Yeah. All I do for black powder is soapy water. That's literally it.
Yeah. And I think people tend to overcomplicate things that should be very simple, and that for most things with guns, it's very simple things to maintain them. Even shooting quote unquote corrosive ammo, just plain soapy water, oil will clean it off fine. So it's, there are a million different types of, solvents being sold and gun cleaning solutions and, all sorts of stuff. But truth be told, all you need is, motor oil to clean your gun, and that'll keep it in tip top. Oh, one more thing of why to use it. And this is sort of a big thing with me and with my channel, especially with my point of aim versus point of impact videos, and then in my first time shooting a Milsurp videos. Always use military surplus ammo if it's available with those videos, simply because original ammo is going to give you the correct trajectories as far as the point of aim versus point of impact. And then it also gives you that authentic shooting experience that you don't get with some commercial ammo, or I would say maybe most commercial ammo, because commercial ammunition manufacturers, they have to sort of download their ammunition. And I think it's for two reasons. The main one's safety, and then also probably, they save a little bit of money on, powder by not loading it that hot. Are not as hot as the Milsurp ammo. Times, especially with the Lee Enfield, the military surplus ammo, the brass isn't contoured exactly the same as the Milsurp ammo. So supposedly the Milsurp 303 is a little bit more reliable than commercial. So that's another reason as far as shootability goes with the guns. But another sort of example with the Lee Enfield is that, like, a lot of people think that the Lee Enfield is a very smooth shooting gun, and the action is smooth. Through commercial ammo through it, that commercial ammo is loaded lighter, easier to extract to those cartridges out of the Lee Enfield when you shoot commercial ammo. But when you shoot hot military surplus 303 out of a Lee Enfield, it's substantially more force required to extract those cartridges out of the gun. So people sort of judge how good an action is on a rifle based on commercial ammo. The golden standard is how that rifle feels shooting original military surplus ammunition.
I would agree with you.
I agree with you on that.
Do we want to move on to the next topic?
Do you guys want to talk about that anymore? I feel like I did all the time.
It makes sense to me. I don't really have much.
No, yeah, I can't really think of anything either. It's pretty good.
You have the issue for safety, like you said, why they download commercial ammunition. So that's because they don't know what gun you're going to use this in. 8mm Mauser is still manufactured in rifles that are new, and so is 7mm Mauser for that matter. So they don't know, the commercial manufacturers don't know if you're going to use this 7mm Mauser in a brand new gun that you just bought that was just made this year, or something that was made in 1895. They hedge their bets and use what a lot of people call lawyer loads and low it down or to a lower spec, probably not too, they don't want to go too low, because if you go too low then you run into other issues. So they kind of keep it right in the mid-range. That way they can keep the people that are using the older stuff happy, because then they can still be able to shoot their rifles.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, they do have to load them low, because a good example with the 8mm Mauser is that one of the weakest actions that shoots 8mm Mauser is the 1888. They have to load the ammo weak enough unchambered in that round.
Yes, that's a common one for the commercial. The Gewehr 1888. You have to load your commercial stuff to the lowest common denominator. So the one that's the weakest has to be the one that is your benchmark, essentially. It's why you also find 4570 in special loads, because it'll say for modern guns only. That means that it's meant for obviously only modern production 4570 rifles, instead of the older stuff from like the late 1800s.
Yeah. Now that's with that being said about how it adds to the shootability, that's not true like across the board with all Milsurp ammo. Example of this is with Turkish 8mm, because that is pretty hot stuff. Like that's hot. That's loaded even hotter. German 8mm Mauser loads or Yugo loads or any other ones out there. That has really high pressures. It's pretty difficult to extract whenever you shoot that out of a gun. So just because it's Milsurp ammo doesn't mean that it's a perfect or a better experience.
Mike, do you have anything else?
No, I don't have anything else.
So
yeah, the only Nazi ammo I ever shot was 8x56R, like German-made 8mm. The 8x56R.
Yeah, And that is something that is another aspect of buying military surplus ammunition, and something that is counterintuitive. It's working against you if you're planning on using it to fire, is the people that are working to buy it to collect it. And that stuff is actually multiple ways collectible, because the 8x56R Nazi surplus usually comes in these little cardboard boxes with two in-block clips with 5 rounds in each clip. Each box has a bunch of stamps on it, which has a Waffenamp, which is the eagle with the swastika. Each clip has the eagle with the swastika, and each round is stamped with an eagle and a swastika and the year that it was made. It's super collectible as far as a World War II collectible, but it's also the only surplus ammunition that you can find for 8x56R.
Yeah, I think that's about the only one that you can really find.
There's other stuff
It's
out
cheaper
there.
than commercial.
Hungary made some, and you can find that sometimes, but not very much in the US.
Yeah, which is why I have barely shot 8x56R. The only time I shot it was in my 35M.
That's why I reload it myself. So, Danny, let's go into the next topic, or the next point here, which is tips when we're buying this ammunition.
Yeah. So it kind of goes a little bit into like your reason for buying it. But the most obvious thing is to, of course, look through and look for any sort of corrosion on the brass. You want to make sure that there's no like holes corroded through it or anything like that. One time I bought a box of steel cased ammo, old stuff, and it was all rusted. All the steel cases were rusted. I was upset because I bought it and I didn't open up the box, because some people, they don't like it when you open up the boxes, but then I didn't do it, and I opened it up when I got home and it was all rusted. So definitely, making sure that it's not corroded. You want to check the primer as well and make sure that that doesn't have any corrosion or anything on it, because like if water is going to penetrate into a cartridge, it's going to go through the primer pocket. Corrosion sort of around that primer, then you might be looking at like some dud cartridges. So
and you're going to see corrosion in more likely from countries that have higher humidity. So countries like South America, most of their surplus ammunition is going to be pretty rough. It's going to be pretty corroded. It's not going to be that useful. What's another one? Danny, the POF ammunition for 303 British is also kind of rough as far as it goes for that, right?
Which ammo was that?
POF.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing with the POF 303 is what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly for its click banginess, which I think is just from either the Cordite being old, from being poorly stored and stuff like that. But yeah, you do kind of have to look out for some makers' marks like that.
And countries specifically.
Yeah. So a great website for this is cartridgecollectors.org/head stamp codes. And that'll give you a list of, it's a pretty extensive list of all the different head stamps out there. Say you're at a gun show or a store or whatever, and you're looking at this ammo and you don't know what it is. Look on the back, check out the head stamp, go to that website, and then you can look up and sort of see what country it's from. Rule of thumb, if it's from like North America or Europe or Russia or for the most part China, it's probably good ammo. If it's from like the southern hemisphere, then it's then you might be looking at, it's pretty hit or miss. Like I have a lot of South American 7mm Mauser ammo. It's either a whole batch of just none of it shoots, or it's decent ammo because it was stored well.
You also got that batch of 7.65, Danny.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. So tell everyone about that 7.65 ammo.
Well, Danny and I and Sam actually went in and bought, how much was it? Like 300, 400 rounds of 7.65 by 53 Argentine surplus.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, the Argentines used 7.65 by 53 for a long time. They made it up into the 60s and 70s, I believe. And I was hoping that this batch would be from that time period, because the 60s and 70s stuff is generally okay. Unfortunately, this batch was almost exclusively 1947, and it's rough. Very rough. It is, as Danny said, it is a hallmark of corrosion. You have issues with moisture getting into the primer pockets. You had moisture getting in actually around the bullet seal. You had moisture actually starting to, and ammonia actually breaking down the brass. I had issues with, and this is actually a tip for somebody if you're not sure, because unfortunately there are people out there that are looking to get rid of this crap because they know that nobody would buy it if it looks this way, so they'll clean them up. And if you're worried about it not sounding quite right, or not looking quite right, or not being the right thing, a good general tip is to shake it and see if you can hear the powder moving around. You should be able to hear it most of the time, especially the Argentine stuff that I'm referring to. It's not loaded to the point where it's completely like stuck in place. It should make a sound moving around. If it doesn't, that means moisture got in there, and it's not going to fire.
Yeah, there's nothing quite as disappointing as buying ammo, like driving all the way to the range just to find out there that this ammo that you bought, you can't shoot it, and it's going to really ruin your whole
I
trip.
have some before and after pictures from whenever I first got the ammunition to whenever I cleaned it, and I'll throw those up in the video, and it's night and day. And that's the key thing, is that if you're starting to do this and you're starting to buy some stuff here, know what to look out for and know what countries to kind of try to avoid, or at least at the very least, like we did, we kind of knew this was a gamble, so we didn't really overpay for it. And I think actually,
it was pretty cheap.
We came out ahead of this because we're going to end up using the components, but it's still like we knew what we were getting into, and it was a gamble to begin with. So that,
Aaron, I remember you showed me that ammo. That was crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, so that just kind of reminds me of, I guess that could be sort of another reason why you would buy Milsurp ammo, is specifically like that, because it's cheap, corroded and messed up. If you get it cheap enough, you can always use the components. And a lot of times you'll be surprised how much ammunition components cost when you buy them all separately.
Yes, that is true. And that's one of the reasons why I went in with it on them as well, because I do reload that round. I think the final cost ended up being like 20 cents a bullet. And if it's 20 cents a bullet, I can't buy that round, that bullet itself, that cheaply. The cheapest I could find them was 35 cents a bullet. So I bought loaded ammunition for 20 cents a round. It probably won't fire, but that's fine, because I can still take that bullet out and reuse that bullet in something else. And that's also another thing that's actually kind of a weird aspect with this, is that 7.65 Argentine uses a .313 bullet, and that does not exist in the aftermarket market or reloading market. That doesn't exist. They have 3.12s and 3.11s, but 3.13s do not exist. Those bullets that we bought are 3.13s.
That's cool.
Well, that kind of gets into my next thing I wanted to talk about, Danny, which goes into the tips with this, and it's kind of also what you should expect whenever you try to use this ammunition. With military surplus ammunition, for the most part, expect to run into some issues whenever you go to fire it, right?
Yeah, you have to expect. It's probably safest to expect the worst when shooting it. Yeah.
And I'm not talking about safety issues. I mean, potentially safety issues here. We're talking some potential safety issues here. But you got to remember, a lot of this stuff hasn't been made. It was made 50 years ago. Some of it's made over 100 years ago. Some of it could be made up to 100 years ago, for crying out loud. The three big things that I came up with as far as this goes is a Squib Brown, which is whenever it fails to fire properly and the bullet doesn't exit the barrel, and therefore it's stuck in the barrel. That's very dangerous, because the potential is for somebody to not notice that and load another round and fire it, and then you could potentially blow up your barrel, blow up your receiver. All kinds of damage could be done then. As Danny mentioned, with POF ammunition in particular, you also have the dangers of click bang, which is either poor material that is failing to light. The gunpowder, in that case cordite, is failing to light quickly, or the primer itself has had some issues either with moisture or just age, and it's failing to light. So what will happen is you'll actually pull the trigger, it'll click, and then there is a pause long enough to notice, and then the gun will fire. So that's very dangerous as well, because you could potentially not realize that's what's going on and aim the gun somewhere it shouldn't be aiming, and then it goes off. And then the final thing that's a concern for safety as well as for this stuff is a split case. And this is something else you should look at whenever you're potentially buying this ammunition. If you can see it in person, look at the neck of the case, which is where the brass meets the bullet. If it's starting to split there, that's a potential safety concern, because what will happen is if that fails, then the brass case might actually rupture and gas might vent out areas where it's not supposed to vent.
Yeah, and depending on the rifle that you're shooting happens, it could be a pretty major deal. So like if I was shooting a Mauser like 98 series, I'm not super worried about that, because that has a lot of redundant, safety features for specifically ruptured cases. But other type of rifles that don't have any of that ruptured gas features, typically the later developed rifles, you have to be really careful with that.
An example that comes to my mind, Danny, as far as rifles that don't really have that kind of safety stuff, is Carcanos.
Yeah. So a lot of ruptured cases shooting. I have a bunch of World War II production 303, and I don't shoot it very often. I only shoot it like if I'm making a specific like video and I need Milsurp ammo. But I noticed it'd be like this kind of extra smoke sort of coming out of the action. And I picked up the brass and look, and sure enough, it was split along the heads. And it's funny because they'll actually leave. This is especially easy to see on brass cases, but if you see like scorch marks on the brass, that's some sort of gas. That's hot gas that's scorching the brass black. So that's another thing to look for in how safe the ammo is.
I had some of that on my Turkish ammo.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
And I should say, and this is not to scare somebody away from purchasing this, but it's not always noticeable either. Sometimes you don't notice the cracks, or you're not paying close enough attention, or it might not even be really super visible, and it'll happen anyway. So it's just something to be aware of a potential. And this could potentially also happen with new commercial ammunition, but it's obviously less likely to have happened.
Yeah, so like squib loads and stuff, like there's videos of, new guns shooting new ammo that get blown up from squid loads. I think semi-automatics are particularly a little bit more susceptible to that. That told the story about a bunch of squib loads in their 1891. Remember that? There's a guy and his wife was shooting his Argentine 1891. And there was a bunch of squibs piled up.
Yes, yeah. So that was actually Lee that Mike was talking about that got him into Spanish Mausers. His wife was shooting an 1891 Argentine Mauser. He was a couple of stalls down from her on the range, and he wasn't super paying attention to what was going on because she's versed in the guns and she knows what she's doing. She fired, and let me clarify, they were using Argentine surplus ammunition, 7.65 Argentine surplus ammunition. She fired. He wasn't super paying attention, but he noticed that it was kind of a little bit less a loud bang than usual, but he didn't really pay much attention to it. And she fired again. He didn't really notice anything. And she fired the third time, and it was a humongous boom. And he comes running over like, what is going on? Thankfully, what had happened was she had squib loaded twice, and 2 bullets were stuck in the barrel, and she fired the third one, and it actually shot all 3 out of the barrel, and it did not blow up the gun. And he says this is a testament to how powerful how well made the 1891 Argentines are, and how much of a piece of junk the Argentine surplus ammunition is. So that is actually a very good outcome to that, because that's the best case scenario for that situation to end.
Yeah, did he notice any damage to the bore or anything?
And he says that the rifle itself didn't have any issues. They didn't use it the rest of the day. He wanted to confirm it before he was able to use it again, but he says he still uses it to this day, but it never had any problems. It thankfully just let it go. It did it.
You know what? That's one of those things, man, that like people think that we're being fanboys. Mausers have an extremely strong action, And even as far back as 1891, the Mausers had, really strong actions, and they're just made to a super high quality. It's
Especially
incredible.
the 1891. That's a nice model Mauser too.
I should state it wasn't a long rifle. It was one of the carbine versions, so it wasn't like it was trying to push it down a 30-inch barrel.
Oh, that's a good point. Huh? I wonder. I never thought about that before. I wonder how a long barrel and a short.
Well, it would build up more pressure if it had a longer barrel.
Oh, okay, yeah. Huh.
So this was a carbine. So still the action is the same, but it had less of a barrel, so it had less of a chance to build up the pressure.
I mean, it was a carbine.
Yeah, whatever. So the next thing I wanted to tell somebody about when they go to buy this ammunition, there are exceptions to this rule, but don't expect MOA like pinpoint accuracy whenever you buy surplus ammunition. It's not made to that specification. There are exceptions. I'll get to that exceptions, but for the most part, these are made to be shot at a man-sized target, and if they can hit that, that's good enough. So they don't typically group super great. They don't. You're not going to be like shooting the wings off flies. It's something else to keep in mind whenever you're using this ammunition. There are exceptions. I know Danny's going to bring this up. The Swiss GP11 is an exception.
Well, yeah, and like the remaining 8mm that I just mentioned. But I would say to go along with your point, like it is partly because of how some countries and some manufacturers made the ammo, but also just has to do with age.
That's also true. As the components break down, they will produce less pressure, and therefore it's actually much more likely to end up with a squib load than you will with an overcharged load.
Yeah, so
I'm going to add also sometimes ammunition is rushed during wartime to get it out. So sometimes you'll have bad ammo just because it was built fast and not built with quality.
That is actually true. I actually spoke to Lee about this topic because of the story we mentioned. And he has some pictures that he's going to provide for me for the video. But it's late war, steel case, German ammo, which was rushed to the front, and it skipped a bunch of processes steps. He said when he fired it, it deteriorated inside his gun. It just disintegrated. He had to pick out pieces of brass from the gun.
Was it brass or steel cased?
Oh no, it was steel case. Sorry, it was steel case. It just disintegrated.
Oh,
that's where a lot of the legends of the 03 receiver blowing up comes from the poorly made ammunition bursting in the chamber when it was fired. Just like a brass case rupture or anything, the high pressures just built up and blew up the receivers. A lot of them did that.
Well, and it's a little bit off topic, but I agree. This is actually something that's interesting. There's a lot of cases where bad reputations have come to guns or to actions that are actually to do with ammunition versus the actual gun itself.
Yeah.
The Ross rifle comes to mind as one of the examples that it's not the perfect design, yes, but it was designed with actual in-spec ammunition, and when it was fed out-of-spec ammunition from World War I, it performed extremely poorly.
Yeah, I can believe that.
There's a couple of other examples. I don't want to get too far down into that, but ammunition plays a huge role in how well a gun functions, and it gets kind of a pass a lot of the times. We don't really focus on it as much whenever something goes wrong, but it's 90% of what's going on. The gun itself is literally how to load it, firing it, and handling the pressure, and then ejecting it. So it's all about what that ammunition is and how good it is.
Yeah. That's very true. Yeah, bad ammo can make a rifle give a rifle a really bad reputation. Example of that, it's more recent, is the Vietnam with the M16.
Yes.
That was because of two different types of powders, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, they were using. I forgot why, but they were. Yeah, they were using the wrong powder or the wrong powder mix or something like that in the ammo, and that was causing a lot of problems. But interesting because that's still something that the AR-15, like its reputation, still suffers today because of the ammunition.
Well, the M16, not the AR-15.
Oh yeah.
Separate. I don't want to get somebody give me emails about that.
I mean, like, it's still okay. This is like way too modern for us, but it's still like the AR-15 gets a bad rap today because of the M16 in Vietnam.
Fair point. The last thing I wanted to mention as far as something you might run into with shooting this ammunition is a lot of these countries used what's called hard primers, which means that the primers themselves are thicker generally, and what that's for is for more used in machine guns or fully auto rifles or semi-auto rifles, so that it doesn't fire the next round, you don't get a chain fire. So they have a hard primer, and if you do not have, if you're starting to get a weak firing pin spring, it's going to be hard to fire it. The Turk ones are especially noted for having hard primers, but you'll run into other countries that have it as well.
Yeah. Also with that, a great example is the 30-06, and that military surplus 30-06 has a lot harder of primers. Is the U.S. rifle caliber 30 M1. It doesn't have like a captive firing pin. It has a free floating firing pin. So you'll notice if you chamber a round, like especially like a commercial round, a commercially loaded 30-06 round, and then pull it out, like, extract it out of the gun, you'll see a little dimple on the primer as of the firing pin slamming forward.
I did not know that, and that's kind of scary.
I didn't know that either.
It was one of the things that I've been wanting to do for a while is like take a single, commercial 30-06 round and just chamber it repeatedly in an M1 and just see if it'll eventually go off. But yeah, a lot of guns, surprisingly, a lot of guns have free floating firing pins. So more of it's a little bit out of the realm of bolt actions, but it's more into the semi-autos. Like a lot of older semi-autos don't have captive, or don't have a firing pin spring to hold the firing pin back and forward a little bit on the cartridge. So
makes sense. All right, the last thing I wanted to mention as far as tips for people, you're gonna run into, for people that want to reload, and we mentioned this briefly with the 7.65 that Danny and I and Sam bought. There's two things to look out for. You have a lot of this stuff will be in steel. A lot of the newer stuff from, let's just say from the 50s on up, will be typically in steel cased. So you can reload steel case, but most people don't bother. It's not really just something that is viable. The brass cased ammunition that you run into will typically be what's called burden primed, or burdan primed, which is different than what.
And it is a burden.
Yeah, it is a burden. It's different from what would the normal brass or the commercial brass that comes out, which is boxer primed. So boxer primed ammunition has a single large hole in the middle of the case at the base. Burdan primed has two holes that are offset, and they're much smaller. They're more like pinholes. They use a different kind of primer for this. Now, this is a military holdover, designed for issues like Danny had mentioned. It's designed so that it doesn't go off very easily as the boxer primed would in a full auto. The other issue is that you run into crimps, and they would crimp them into place, and that's also to keep the primers from falling out, which was an issue they ran into with early semi-auto and full auto machine guns and rifles, that the primers would actually fall out from being moved around so much and moved and forced around so much. Danny, why don't we get into the future of surplus ammunition?
Oh,
it's bright and sunny, right?
Okay, so this is going to be a little bleak because of the cliche. They're not making it anymore. So, it is still being imported. Hopefully, as overseas, like warehouses get bought or discovered or whatever, and this ammo is being imported, making it anymore, and it's only getting harder and harder to find this ammo. Pretty much all of it's going up in price, and even the ammo, so even the Swiss GP11 imported fairly regularly is going up in price. That's mostly just from, Swiss guns are getting a little bit more popular, so there's more demand for the ammo. But then also people are realizing how amazingly high quality the ammo is.
Well, and GP11 is actually still made.
Well, they just started making it again. It wasn't made for a long time, and then they just started making it again.
I agree with you. The future for a lot of the more obscure calibers is definitely going to be bleak. 8mm Mauser in particular, as far as surplus ammunition goes, because nobody uses it anymore. I still think there's a large amount. There just has to be these huge amounts of 7.62 by 54R and 7.62 by 39 that have not made it to the U.S. because there's a lot of restrictions on importing from certain countries right now. And there's I'm sure tons of that still out there because, you know, every Soviet Union country had to have that ammunition. So it's still there, and I think it's still being produced for the most part in some areas. So that particular ammunition, I don't think is going to go anywhere anytime soon. 30-06 surplus is going to dry up here pretty quickly. Nobody really uses that ammunition anymore. That's about all the major ones that I can think of. Danny, do you have any other ones?
Well, the 30-06, I think it's still being dug out. Like, I think the U.S. government made so much of it that trickle on for a while. But yeah, it's only going to become more and more rare. And so I think surplus ammo has this sort of life cycle. It's, you know, it first hits the market, or, you know, it's really plentiful and it's very cheap. You know, it's super cheap. And, you know, of course, everyone shoots it and buys it because it's so cheap. I just talked to this older guy, and he said that when he was a kid, he used to shoot, you know, German World War II ammo because it was everywhere and it was dirt cheap. And he can't believe, you know, now, like, all this old, which is worth a lot of money now, old ammo that he shot. But I think that's sort of the life cycle. It's really cheap. It gets shot, and then sort of it gets shot less and less as the price goes up, and it gets collected more and more, which kind of, you know, goes into the other reason why, you know, you would collect it is specifically, you know, because it's got a cool, neat, you know, historical factor to the ammo. And, you know, there's a lot of ammo that I collect, you know, specifically, I know I'll never shoot. It's cool for a certain, you know, display. So, you know, I'm into German stuff and I'm into Swedish stuff. So whenever I find, you know, German or Swedish ammo, I buy it, you know, if it's a good price, and add it to my collection.
Yeah, and you know, there's not been any world wars, thankfully. So there's not going to be there's still a lot of ammunition out there for, I guess, the 7.62 NATO and 5.56, and you can still get surplus for that. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon until that round itself is replaced.
Yeah. So I guess I was speaking for cartridges that are not currently being used by militaries. That is, you know, going to go away. But Milsurp ammo, yeah, like 5.56, you know, 7.62 by 39. I mean, yeah, like probably our grandkids will still be shooting that stuff, you know. That's not going to go anywhere. But that's sort of the life cycle of ammunition in general. It gets adopted, you know, and then once it gets surplused, you know, or there's a surplus of it, it hits the civilian market. When the different, you know, governments or militaries stop using it, you know, they dump it onto the market, and then there's the glory days when, you know, they dump a ton of it on the market and it's super cheap. But then, you know, it gets more expensive, and then eventually it's super collectible. Really, you know, 100 years from now, it'll be very rare and very collectible, you know.
Right.
I do have another tip for Swedish Mauser shooters.
That niche, huh?
Oh no, there are dozens of us. Dozens. So to the Swedish Mauser shooters that might be listening, and the few of those that might reload, this is the best deal, hands down, on military surplus ammo, and that is buying 6.5 wooden blanks. It's like the M14 ammo. It comes in like red boxes, and then it's got like a wooden bullet instead of a regular projectile. And then the powder in it is kind of junk. You can't use it in the rifle. When you buy it, it's so cheap that you can get it for like, 5 cents a round or 8 cents a round or something like that, super cheap. And what you're really buying with that is a primed brass. So, the secret's out already because Iraq veteran, they made a video about this, but JG sales, and I think I don't know if I showed it in my JG sales video, but when I drove to Prescott, Arizona, I bought pounds of these wooden blanks, and it worked out to be 2 cents a round. And so basically for 2 cents a round, I have already primed good brass. So all you have to do is pull the bullet out. You can dump that powder out of it. When you're ready to reload, put real powder and then a real projectile in it, and then you're good to go. And that's reloading on the cheap. So
Yeah,
good tip to like the three of you that are listening.
To reinforce what Danny is saying, I've seen somebody that said they got 2,000 of those blank rounds for $96.
Yeah, well, it's JG. They sell them by the case, because it's when I went there, it was like, I think it was like $60 or something like that for a case or whatever. Or if you buy 6 cases, $6. So it works out like 6 cases is 4,800 rounds. So of these, I'm pretty sure it's 6 cases. I hope I don't have to put my foot in my mouth, but I still have all of these cases of ammo. I haven't quite broken into them yet, but set up. I'm gonna start digging into that stuff and reloading a buttload of 6.5 Swedish.
Nice. Well, Danny, do you have any comments or anything else?
Yeah, no. So I guess the main thing to take away from this is that when you buy military surplus ammo, careful, sort of have low expectations. Sort of, if you're going to the range or something, maybe bring some backup ammo in case that stuff doesn't shoot. And
I think it's very similar to whenever you're buying a military surplus handgun or rifle. Look it over, inspect it if you can, be safe.
Yeah, enjoy it. Even if the ammo that you bought is super cheap, realize that it's not always going to be that cheap. Don't blow it all. Don't just shoot it all, and waste it at the range. Don't like needlessly shoot just because it's cheap. Sort of savor it. Savor the ammo. Use it wisely shooting, and don't just blow through it all, because a day will come when you go, oh man, I can't believe I shot all that ammo. It's so expensive now.
Yeah. Do you have any comments from the YouTubes?
Oh, yes. Let me pull it up real quick. I've gotten a lot of comments on the French one. I got a comment from RD Mod Garage 850. So he's from where I'm from. If he's got a 850 prefix to that. Still building my collection, he says. I just got a #1 Mark III Star. New ideas for my next one. Keep up the great work. Not exactly a question, but so if you're listening, man, there are so many like rabbit holes you can go down. SMLE is a great rifle to add to your Milsurp. I would say look at what sort of nations that you might be into, or if you do like these French guns, they do tend to be pretty cheap. French bolt action. I mean, not the Lebel; those are kind of pricey, but Berthier's and Moss 36s are pretty fairly priced. So not a bad one to get into, but just make sure you're buying a gun because it's something you're passionate about. Scenario, you don't really. This is the greatest part about collecting Milsurps, is that as long as you don't overpay, you're not really going to lose money. You can always at least get your money out of it.
Yeah, that's the saying, isn't it? It's you don't overpay, you just paid too soon.
Yeah, because they do go up, man. Milsurps, they appreciate.
And that's something that we haven't mentioned before, is that if you did get caught up in something, and I think we've all been there, we've gotten caught up in something and we're like, oh, I gotta have this, it doesn't matter what it costs, and then you find out later is like, oh wait, this isn't what I thought it was. This is actually something else, and it's less than what I expected it to be, or something like that. It's okay. You just you learn from it and you can move on from it. And typically, like, unless that piece is broken or something, it's going to appreciate the value anyway. It might take longer, but it's going to get there.
I have another comment I can read. It's not quite a question, but it's kind of a good point. Guy's name is I'm from NY City. He goes, I want a Moss 49/56 so bad. says the gun's forbidden due to its grenade launcher barrel. That's sad, man. I was in upstate New York, and I went to a gun store, and it's a sad thing, man. Like these restrictive states. Recently went to a gun store in California. It's sad, man. Yeah, all the silly restrictions and everything. And so even though like there's not any grenades for that gun, they probably haven't been made for like 30 years or more. Cool historical gun because of this arbitrary rule.
30 years, Danny. 30 years would be the late 80s. We're talking probably 60 years.
I mean, if it's 49/56, meaning that it was updated in 56, they are French, so I'm sure they held on to this for as long as possible. So
that is something we learned from the French rifle episode. They did like to keep stuff around.
Yeah, so maybe like 40 years.
All right, well, I think that wraps up all the info we wanted to talk about. So, unless you have anything else.
No, that's about it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the episode. This was, I know we could have got a lot deeper into a lot of the aspects. There's just, ammunition is such like a huge topic that we're just sort of touching on it today in this sort of broad strokes here in this episode.
We do want to plug the channel that Danny runs, which is North Florida Gun Guy, which will have these podcasts up on it, and as well as other videos that Danny has produced.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna start adding pictures to the podcasts on YouTube. So if you're listening on a podcast listening thing, if you go to North Florida Gun Guy on YouTube, you can watch the different pictures and stuff that we display. That'll just kind of show you a little bit more what we're talking about while we're talking about it. We are going to be setting up a Patreon account for Milsurp World. This is not like a begging thing or whatever. I hate it when people plug their Patreons and stuff. But so we are kind of forced to do this because the different uploading sites that we're using, they limit the amount of podcasts that we can upload unless we pay more money. And then, unfortunately, we can't really pay for all of this stuff. So we're going to really need...
Hold on. It's not that they limit the amount that we upload. They do that, but it actually will delete episodes. I suggest everybody to go to Danny's YouTube page because it'll have older episodes on there. The podcast host that we use does not keep the podcast past 90 days unless you have a subscription, and we do not currently have a subscription. So if older episodes have gone missing, they'll be found on Danny's YouTube page. We are potentially setting up a Patreon to cover the costs of getting a subscription to our podcast host, and then potentially we could keep those episodes in there for indefinitely. Currently, we would need to have $12 a month to be able to keep all podcasts there as long as we wanted.
Yeah, so I hate it when like YouTube channels and stuff I'm watching start begging for money, and I don't mean to be that way, but if anyone's watching and you like this sort of content and you want to make sure that our podcasts stay up, they stay on as many venues as possible, then your support would be really greatly appreciated.
All right. I will say goodbye to everybody, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks, guys.